Good morning, everybody. We're here at a residence that recently did a weatherization. As you know, OTEC has lots of different conservation programs we help our members with, and residential weatherization is one of those programs. So today we're going to look inside, we're going to verify that everything was done correctly, and so let's go ahead and step inside. We'll talk about what we're going to look at. So we're here at Mrs. Snyder's house, and they've done a weatherization. Typically what happens is we come out, of course, measure up the home, do an audit to find out what the thermal shell of the home is. Obviously these folks have electric heat, they want to be able to lower their electric bill, and so we offer the weatherization program to help them be more energy efficient and do that. So we come out, Susie conducted an audit, she measured up the home, looked at what insulation levels, if there was any, prior to the installation, and determined what all was in good shape, what wasn't. What she found was there was no insulation in the floor, very little insulation in the attic, and so they've added those measures. When you do insulation in the attic, you've got to add ventilation in order to keep the moisture out so we don't cause damage to the structure. And down in the crawl space, when you add floor insulation, of course now you've got pipes that might freeze, so you've got to wrap those pipes. You've got to put black plastic 6mm visqueen on the ground to stop the moisture from wicking up through the ground, and the black is so that plants won't grow, that sort of thing. So those are the types of things we'll be looking at here in just a minute. We're going to go ahead and head up into the attic, take a look at the insulation, and determine if it was done correctly. Okay, we're up in Mrs. Snyder's attic here, where she had some fiberglass insulation blown in. As you can see, the rafters here behind us, the first thing we take a look at, make sure that there's no moisture damage. No dry rot or anything like that. Everything looks fine, and everything is dry and good and solid. And we did that in the initial inspection to verify everything looked good. Then we also determined how much insulation there was, and if you'll notice right down here in front, you'll see that there's lots of white new fluff, which is the new fiberglass insulation. Below that is some older fiberglass insulation, and below that is vermiculite, which is another type of insulation. So years and years ago, when energy was really cheap, people had very little insulation, and vermiculite was a form of insulation that they put in. They usually put in a few inches of insulation, and that was it. That also took a lot of moisture out with it, because as your heat escapes the attic, it takes moisture with it. So when you start holding back the heat with more insulation, you got to put in more ventilation. So you'll see behind me here lots of vents that were put in to help ventilate the attic and let the moisture out, especially during the winter time. So we've now got this new white fiberglass insulation blown in, and as you can see, it's fairly deep. If I can find a spot here to get my tape clear down in. The insulation here is about 17 inches deep, and that's of course measuring down to the bottom of the vermiculite, then the fiberglass insulation that was old, and then the fiberglass insulation that is new. And so that will probably bring them up to about an R38. We'll crunch the numbers and verify that everything's okay in a much cooler spot than here. All right, now we're down in the crawl space down here, and this is a fine crawl space, and of course you've heard all about these places where there's always spiders and snakes, but on an inspection after a whole bunch of insulators have come through, they pretty well chased away all the spiders, all the snakes. There's really not a lot down here. As you see, there's 6mm black plastic laying on the ground. Again, that's to stop the moisture from wicking up, causing dry rot to the structure here. You've got fiberglass insulation that fills the cavity, and that's probably about an R30 that has been placed there, and it's got nylon string to hold it so that it won't fall down to the ground here in about 5 or 6 years. So that's done correctly. We've got some insulation on ductwork for the furnace that supplies the heat to the home. That's insulated. It looks a little rough, but it's heavily blanketed, so I'm sure it's adequate. And then, as you'll notice off over this way, we've got some vents, crawl space vents. Again, those vents are to keep this dry down here, because in old homes, or homes of years ago, they used to just pound so much heat to it that it drove all the moisture out. Never a problem with dry rot. But when you start putting insulation in and holding the heat back, then the humidity that's created inside the home ends up condensing in the cold spaces and causing dry rot. And we did notice over here, back on the far side, the domestic water, the water supply. You can see where it's got insulation on this pipe that supplies water, so it won't freeze, because this space is going to get cold now because you're holding the heat up in the warm area of the home where you want it. Don't want to heat the crawl space. This could get cold and freeze. This is insulated, but I see a pipe right over here that's not insulated. And so we'll have to call the crew back, and they'll have to insulate that pipe with this closed cell foam that they use. It works very effectively, but that's why we do inspections. We want to make sure that everything is done right, and in this case, we found a little problem. We'll be sending them back. And of course, this is this pipe here is the discharge, and it doesn't freeze. There's no problem with that. It's only the supply lines that we worry about. So that really takes care of it. We've got the black plastic on the ground. We've got insulation on the pipes. Most of them, we'll kind of have them come back and fix what they didn't do right. We got insulation on the ductwork, insulation in the floors, and so this is pretty good to go, other than the one little problem, and we'll have them come back and get her fixed. So in conclusion, OTEC came out, we did an audit of the home, we found some deficiencies in the thermal shell of the building, of this residence, and we identified those things. A contractor came out, did an installation, insulation in the attic, added more there, insulation in the floor, and put the plastic on the ground, the pipe wrap, the insulation over the ductwork, that sort of thing. We've got the one deficiency that we'll get back with them on to get that fixed. And some of the other things that we could look at in a home, of course, are the windows and the walls, the doors, some infiltration. Here, however, though, they already had double pane windows, so really to put new double glazed windows on wouldn't be an energy savings, so therefore they don't qualify for any rebates from us to go ahead and do that. But the other stuff, because there was deficiencies, they do qualify for rebates. So this practically concludes an energy audit, weatherization, and then an inspection. The only thing that we'll do now is get a hold of the contractor, come back and do those minor repairs, get those squared away, and we're done. The customer then, of course, will enjoy more comfort and lower energy bills. So that's a weatherization from Oregon Trail Electric Co-op.